Hi everyone, this is Colin Tierney at SageWorks. I work on the marketing team here, and I will be introducing our speaker today and getting into the topic. A couple housekeeping items that we have to share here at the beginning of the presentation. So let's go ahead and do that briefly. This will only take a couple of minutes. All right, let's try this again. So it looks like we were having some sound issues. If you could just open up that question box and let me know if that's getting better. Looks like it is. Okay. Thank you. And let's go ahead and let's start this again. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can ask those in the questions box, which many of you have already found, which is terrific. The speaker is interested in taking those questions at any point. So please, as you have questions, thoughts, comments, ideas, please put those into that questions box. There is a copy of the presentation and some other information about SageWorks in the handout section, so you can take a look at that during the presentation. I'm going to spend just another minute here on the intro. A little bit about us, if you're unfamiliar with SageWorks. We have two products addressing business advisory and coaching. One is the valuation solution, which follows AICPA guidelines for a business valuation and helps streamline, save time in that process. And then ProfitSense, which is our flagship, is a business advisory product. It is designed to generate business insights, so it's looking at financial data and essentially diagnosing that business and explaining how it's doing. Let's go ahead to the next slide. All right, so a little bit again about SageWorks before we kick it off. If you're unfamiliar with us, we've been around since 1998, providing technology solutions to CPAs, business coaches, other types of consultants, business valuation professionals, and actually in the last few years introduced products to the banking and credit union space and help with loan management, things of that sort. I do have to share this legal statement on all of our webinars. It's basically saying we may make forward-looking statements, of course. We can't predict the future, so you have to take those into consideration and in the context. This is available to read in the handout section, like I mentioned earlier, as well as you'll receive a copy after the presentation. Now let's introduce the speaker and dive in. So Sean Hutchinson, the CEO of Strategic Value Advisors. Sean and I, this is actually our first time working together, but he and I know each other through the Exit Planning Institute, which is one of the leading groups on exit planning. So you'll get to hear maybe a little bit about them today and a lot more actually from Sean and his experience personally. From what I've learned so far about his work and just the conversations we've had briefly, I think you guys will get a lot out of the presentation today. It's really interesting to see how exit planning has changed and evolved over the years, and you'll certainly see a piece of that today and how firms are taking advantage of it and how they're incorporating it into their practice. All right, so at this point, I'm going to change the presenter over to Sean, and he will be able to take it from here.
All right, thank you, Colin. Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We are actually a user of SageWorks, so I'm pleased to be able to do this with them. You know, we've been, at Strategic Value Advisors, we've been talking to business owners for a long time about the possibilities for their transition in the future. I've been part of the EPI, the Exit Planning Institute, since 2008. That's when I got my Certified Exit Planning Advisor. credential, and I'm also on the board of National Board of Advisors, and I am on the SEPA faculty. Well, if you guys can hear me, it sounds like we're having a little bit of technical problem with the sound again. So call. I just ask you if you're out there and you can hear me, could someone just throw that into the chat window and verify that that you can hear my audio? Colin, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Sean.
Okay. All right, let's start over. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry for that technical glitch. We've been having a little sound problem this morning. Hey, Colin, we can hear quite a bit of background noise on your side, so maybe you could mute.
Yep, I'll do that.
And we'll get started. Okay. So I've been doing transition planning with owners since 2008 when I got my credential with the SEPA program. As you saw from my bio, I've been involved in mergers and acquisitions for quite a while. And before that, I was the CEO of a company that actually was built through 33 roll-up acquisitions in 3 years. So that was kind of my trial by fire. But it's also where I learned a lot about the way that deals actually come together and the various options that are out there for private business owners. I do this presentation for a lot of different advisors around the country from all of the different disciplines that are typically part of a multidisciplinary transition team or value acceleration team, as we speak about it in the Exit Planning Institute, that can create a full state of transition readiness for a client. Now, we all know from our experience that a smarter owner is a better client. And so one of the things that we need to do within our own practices is be familiar with all of the exit options, because we need to be able to talk to owners about it and bring them up to speed. That's a piece of the owner engagement. We don't have to know everything about these options, but we need to know enough that we can have that conversation. I call exit options, when I talk about it with other advisors, our comfort food. These are the basic DNA, the basic building blocks for being able to advise a client. It's our spaghetti and meatballs. It's our macaroni and cheese. It's what we turn to on a cold night, needing to sit in front of our fire, and this is where we go. So, with that in mind, I want to show you first, what's at stake? Let's set the stage a little bit here. So this is an asset allocation of investment assets with a 65-year-old typically. It's going to be pretty conservative, 50% bonds, 35% stocks, a little cash, some real estate, and some other precious metals or something else. That's what it's typically going to look like. Now we have a polling question here. On average, what percentage of an owner's investment portfolio is made up of their business? Because you noticed on that previous slide, we didn't have the value of the business in the investment assets. So why doesn't everybody answer this, and we'll see where we stand.
All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and close that poll question. Sean, it looks like we have the results here. So less than 25%, or I should say 22% of people said less than 25%. 21% of people said 25 to 50. 33% said 50 to 75, and 25% said more than 75.
Great. So for those of you that said more than 75%, you're right. Owners self-report when asked that question that their personal net worth tied up in the business is somewhere between 75 and 95%. Now the business, as you know, is an illiquid asset, and I would put it as a super illiquid asset. Real estate is illiquid, but there's a market for real estate. I can go out, I can get a value, I can get comparables, I can find financing. This is of a different character. So think about this as you see there on the screen, the Pac-Man that may be eating the financial future of the business owner. And yet, when we think about the business, we really don't put it on the pie chart in the same way as the other investment assets, despite the fact that the business owner holds almost all of their financial risk in that single asset. Now you guys know, because you're investors, that if your investment advisor came to you and said, hey, I think it's a great idea if we packed all of your money into one stock, by the way, 95 out of 100 cents, right there in that one stock, your answer would be, I hope, you're fired. But that's really what's happening for most business owners. Now let's delve a little deeper. The statistic that out of 100 businesses that go to market, 80 will never make it. And out of those 20 that are left, only about 12 will actually transition. We talk to our clients about being in the 12. This is an extremely high hurdle. If you can think about at a macroeconomic level here in the United States, that's a tremendous exhaust of personal net worth into the atmosphere that just never gets realized. And it's something of a tragedy for business owners that have worked their entire life to build a business to not be able to actually monetize the work that they've put into it. Now, we talk about something called the 3 legs of the stool, master planning. This was introduced a couple of years ago, I guess, by one of the founders of the Exit Planning Institute named Peter Christman, and he has a book called Master Planning. And he said there are 3 legs of the stool, all of which have to be attended to at the same time if you're going to come up with a reasonable plan for a business owner to create transition readiness. The first one is optimize the value of the business, which is where we as advisors tend to spend a lot of time. The second leg of the stool is personal financial planning or personal financial readiness. So transition readiness has also to do with personal financial readiness. And the third leg is the life after business plan. I don't know if you guys have had the experience where an owner whose identity is really tied to the business and has been for a long, long time, they get really terrified as the day comes when they are going to exit the business. Somebody else's name is going to be on the door, so to speak, and they've got to figure out what their life is going to be like after they exit. Without a life after business plan, transactions often fall apart because the owner is just not sure what's on the other side of the door. Now, Pete, I think rightly, says all 3 legs of that stool have to be in balance or the stool is going to get wobbly and it's going to fall over. When I talk to owners about this concept, they perk up. They really want to listen to this message because nobody has talked to them about this before. It's a holistic approach, and it's really important for them to understand. I can promise if you talk to your clients about this, you will find that they respond very differently to this idea than they do of talking just about the transaction, about the transition itself. Now, Chris Snyder, the president of the company, recently released a book called Walking to Destiny, and he identified 5 stages of value maturity. Today, we're talking about harvesting because we're talking about exit options. The identification, defense, and enhancement of value drivers in a business are the first 3 stages. Harvesting is a natural progression of that activity. EPI teaches a value acceleration methodology that really covers these first 4 stages. And then, of course, if you've harvested the wealth out of the business, then you need to pay attention to that wealth going forward. You need to manage the wealth, but you also need to manage your life, which goes back to the master plan. We're going to take IPO off the table with the assumption that there aren't very many of us out there that are going to be dealing with public offerings. When we talk about exit options, there are 7 for private businesses. We have what we call the inside 4. Inside because we're dealing with either employees or managers or partners or an intergenerational transfer to a family member. On the outside, sale to a third party, recapitalization, orderly liquidation. We'll go through each of these and some of the pros and cons of each. But one of the things that I have had experience with, in my experience, is that most owners think when they talk about transition that they have to sell their business to a third party. And just talking to them about the 7 options and making them aware that there are other ways that they can go is actually a pretty eye-opening experience for them. They keep in mind owner engagement and owner education, obviously hand in hand, but don't make the assumption that owners know a whole lot about this. This is something of a mystery, and I think as advisors, it's our responsibility to kind of, take the lid off the black box, demystify this, and owners are much more likely to engage. So inside 4, outside 3. There's another poll question. EPI does a state of owner readiness for transition survey in locations around the United States. They've got 6 of them going right now, regional surveys, and then they combine that data. So the poll question is, based on that survey, how do you think the majority of owners respond to the question, are you familiar with all of your exit options? We'll leave it open for about 30 seconds.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close that poll question now, so please finish up voting. And it looks like 12% said yes, 55% said no, and 33% said not sure.
Okay, so here's the result. It's a bit of a trick question for you guys. As it turns out, it sorts into about a third, a third, a third. However, I would say this. I think the no's are being honest, and I think the not sure's are actually no's. So my conclusion is that about 2/3 of owners out there really aren't familiar with all of the exit options, which goes back to what I said. If you start this conversation by saying, look, there's more than one way to do this, and at the end of this presentation, I'm going to suggest to you that there are ways to combine exit options, and there are reasons for combining exit options, so that we're not just advising our clients to narrow it down to one and try that, because I think that the chances of failure of that actually materializing in a way that everybody can be happy with are pretty low. So this has been consistent across all of the surveys that have been conducted by EPI. And this is, I think the first survey was actually conducted in 2013. So consistently, we have an opportunity as advisors to address at least 2/3 of the owners just by educating them about exit options. Also, we've gathered some data on preferred types of transitions. This changes over time. When we first started doing the surveys through EPI, the intergenerational transfer was more prominent than it is today. We'll talk about some of the reasons why that might be the case. But I think one of the contributors to seeing 30% third-party buyout interest is that owners actually are aware that multiples, that valuations have been rising for some time, and that they continue to be high. 2 quarters ago, they were probably as high as I've ever seen it in my career, and especially for larger privately held businesses that are around the, say, 75 to 100 million in revenue mark. If they're healthy quality deals, they were getting multiples from private equity at least of close to 12x. That's very, very high. Owners are aware of these trends. They hear it through the grapevine. They talk to their friends at the country club. And so there has been a significant uptick in the interest in third-party buyouts. I think intergenerational tends to be supplanted by that because, frankly, intergenerational transfers tend to be at a lower value. So again, however, you've got about 1/3 of the owners reporting that they're really not sure what their preferred transition is. So again, there's an advisory opportunity to sit down, engage, educate, and try to help them get smarter about their options, about what's really realistic for their business. We're going to go through the pros and cons of each of these, but let's define each as we go just to make sure that we're on the same page. So an intergenerational transfer, I'll bet that a lot of you are familiar with this because so many of the businesses in America are family-owned. We're going to transfer usually the stock in the business to our direct heirs, usually the children, but not always. We do see generation skipping situations more often than you would think. Generation skipping would be the children are the obvious heirs to the business, but the owner decides the grandchildren are really better suited, and so moves the business right over the top, just leapfrogs Gen 2, goes on to Gen 3. In family business, 50% of the business owners say that they really do want to exercise this option, but only about 30% end up doing it. And that may have to do with many of the cons. Family dynamics are always an issue in family-owned businesses, as you know. I am the 3rd generation in a 60-year-old manufacturing business back in Oklahoma City where I grew up. I can tell you that family dynamics trump business dynamics every single time, and this holds true for family businesses in any case. In most instances within family business, decisions can be quite emotional, and of course there's the background dynamic going on which may color the situation dramatically. You have illiquid buyers in most cases. Children tend to not have as much money as their parents unless something unusual has happened. Because they lack funds, the parent is most likely going to be the bank. And when you are the lender, you tend to start thinking about whether your kids are really the right people to run the business and are they in fact creditworthy. That takes on a very different financial risk profile than just kind of a blanket statement, I want my kids to own the business. So the reality begins to sink in. The next reality that sinks in is that intergenerational transfer tends to be the lowest value transfer other than orderly liquidation. So if you think about the one company, many values concept that Rob Slee set out in his book on private capital markets, which if you don't have it is a really good book to get, he basically said, look, you can take the same balance sheet, you can take the same income statement, same cash flow characteristics, same future, for companies that are essentially identical, and even if their risk profiles are similar, the method of transfer will affect the value. Because, as Sam Zell put it once, liquidity equals value. If you have less liquidity, less capital available to do the deal, the value has to fall. So, you're going to get a lower sales price from the kids. It's actually, of the 7 on the chain of one company, many values, you've got orderly liquidation is number 1, lowest value, intergenerational transfer is number 2. You do have situations where the key employees really don't agree that the kids are the right people to run the business. And so there is flight risk. There are lots of things that you can do there to try to blunt that risk. But, you know, the question is always, did kids get the own, are they running the company? Are they the executives in the company because they have the right last name? In other words, they won the lottery, they won the genetic lottery. Or are they really qualified? And if the employees or the key managers feel that they aren't, the chances are very good that in the near future, after the transition is complete, or even before, they will leave the company. Now, of course, if the kids really aren't the right people to run the company, you've had a double whammy. Kids aren't good, and all your key managers who actually know something about it have left. If you're the banker, if this is a self-finance deal, this is a huge concern. It has to be carefully planned before the fact. Now, there are some significant pros here. Everybody cares about legacy in family business, and this is a great way to preserve it. Of course, that can be as emotional as it is operationally disciplined. You have a lot of control over the timing. It's a well-planned transition in most cases. However, if the hand is forced by sickness, death, divorce, and there is no contingency in place, a planned transition goes right out the window, no matter what method you want to use. It's not a very costly thing to do, typically. You do have more control over it in many ways. There's really less disruption. And there really is a high buyer-seller motivation. And what we mean by that is that because of the legacy and the family concerns, everybody, hopefully, but in most cases, gets on the same page because it's meaningful to the family. The stakeholding interests are very, very high. And alignment there, therefore, can be powerful. I just want to remind you, if you have any questions, feel free to send those. Colin will notice and he'll chime in. I like to handle those as they come up, but we'll also have time at the end. Management buyouts. There are lots of different versions of this. There are also management buy-ins, and there's something called a buy-in management buyout, which is, one of the most interesting acronyms in the M&A world, BIMBO. This is pretty straightforward, where the owner sells all or part of the company to the management team, and then the management team leverages the balance sheet of the business to actually finance. Now, again, these are typically pretty illiquid buyers, which is one of the cons, and therefore the value is going to drop compared to what we might call fair market. There are a number of things to be concerned about, as you can see here. Let me highlight the ones that typically I see as the ones to really be concerned about. Threat of flight or coercion of the owner. In other words, if you don't sell the company to us, we're going to go somewhere else. We're going to start a competitive business, whatever the case may be. Managers are often not good entrepreneurs. You guys have probably seen that if you've worked with businesses. Frequently, managing is not the same thing as taking risk. Managers don't always practice what we would call ownership thinking. And the transition from management to ownership can be exciting, but it can also be troublesome. It's kind of like the post-acquisition integration. It all sounds good until you try to figure out exactly how you're going to fit the thing together after the deal is done. It doesn't always work very well. And then the distraction internally. You still have to run this business. If the managers are engaged in their typical 60-hour week, to take time away from that, and also for the owner to take time away from being involved in the business, can be really disruptive to the way that the business operates. And of course, taking your eye off that ball can affect performance, which can affect value. So now we've got a little bit of a spiral going on, which can become a concern. Pros, the big one is continuity. These guys, the managers know everything there is to know about the business for the most part. And so the transition can be quite smooth. You've got really highly motivated buyers. There's a lot of pent-up desire when these deals get done. They've been thinking about or hoping that they'll be able to purchase the business for quite some time. And then you've got the human capital and the knowledge, which is part of the continuity. I also like the fact that private equity firms do back management teams. And this is an interesting example of how recapitalization by a private equity firm, partnering with the management team, providing additional capital for growth in the future, is a powerful combination. And private equity likes investing in businesses alongside management because they're getting the benefits, the continuity, the know-how, the preservation of key relationships with customers, vendors, knowledge of the internal processes, and they kind of know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. It's very powerful for private equity to access that. It's great comfort, and typically it'll drive a higher value for the exiting owner. Sale to existing partners. One thing that I want you to remember about this, maybe you've had an experience or two, the buy-sell agreement is the heart of this transfer. My experience has been that about 90 out of 100 partnerships lack a good buy-sell agreement. And there are a number of things that I mean by a good buy-sell agreement. Number one, they have one. Two, that it's actually been read and updated over the 20, 30, 40-year life of the business. Typically, when I ask that question of owners, they'll say, yeah, we have one. When's the last time we looked at it? It's been a long time. By a long time, they mean 20 years. And they can't really tell each other or us what's in it. So it's become an invisible but yet controlling document in the potential partner transfer. And you guys probably know that there are lots of different versions of buy-sell arrangements. There can be a requirement for a market value appraisal. There can be sort of true-up provisions. There can be shotgun or roulette provisions. It is not a one-size-fits-all document, and yet, for most business owners, it's kind of a mystery. In addition to that, it's typically either unfunded or underfunded. And by that we mean, of course, with death or disability or both insurance coverage that actually is adequate to support the value of the business. Now, if life insurance was purchased, either cross-purchase or some other form of it between the owners back in the beginning when they were younger and healthier, then they probably purchased it at a price that they could afford, which means that the face value of the coverage is lower. And then they never updated it potentially as the value of the business grew. So they've got coverage, maybe they've got $2 million, the business is worth 20, we have a serious problem if something happens to them. So buy-sell arrangements are so key to partnership transfers, and yet often ignored, or just kind of, the potted plant rule. We put it over in the corner, we pull the plant in front of it, we'll handle it when we need to. But if it is not in place and understood by the owners, I have seen these situations go so toxic so quickly. It's interesting. You talk about family dynamics on the intergenerational side. I think the dynamics on partnerships are just as difficult to navigate and potentially even more dramatic. So this is an area when we see a partnership and we're starting to work with a client, we really like to go deep on the buy-sell and determine what the dynamic between the partners is before we go any further with strategizing about whether there can be a partner transfer, or even whether it's a viable option or whether it's the best option.
Sean, I have a quick question on that.
Sure.
When you're looking at that partner dynamic, how would you characterize like a partner dynamic that would be like a good one, or one that would sort of lead you to the next step in the process? Like, are there certain indications that you look for?
Yes. So, as you might guess, a good buy-sell agreement that's updated and funded is a really good sign that they're being attentive. Pardon me, attentive to these issues. I also like to know whether they've actually talked about this recently. Have they had conversations with one another? Have they had conversations with their spouses, significant others, other family members? Have they developed a team of advisors that could help them through this process? These are all signs that they are not waiting until the last minute to have these conversations. Then there are the business issues. If their role in the business has been well defined and they both, either there's, if there are two partners, do they have distinct roles which honor the fact that partners are often not good at everything and can be very powerful as, when their expertise is in a particular area. So that knowing what their role in the business is and contributing in their own way to its success, I think indicates that the partner relationship is healthy. And then there's the fact that, do they talk to one another? Do they actually discuss business issues, or do they just come in? I've got a situation right now where the two partners in the business, they've been in business with one another for 28 years, and they literally come to work and they don't share information with one another at all. One goes out on the shop floor and does manufacturing. The other one goes in the office and does sales and marketing. And they may not talk to one another all day. They don't share information. They don't talk strategy. So those are, it's like any dynamic. Communication is really key. And are they talking about the future? What they want to see happen? Do they know what success looks like for them? Does that answer your question, Colin?
Yep, that is great. Thank you, Sean.
Okay, sure. one of the things that we want our partnership clients to realize is that the buy-sell agreement may restrict their options. So often they'll come with ideas about how they want to make the transfer, but the fact is there is a buy-sell agreement in place that doesn't allow them to do it in the way that they want to. So working with them to mitigate that situation is one possibility. We can create a new buy-sell arrangement in some cases, depending on the number of partners that are in the business. If it's just two, we've got a little more flexibility. Beyond that, it becomes more difficult. Again, I think this sale to existing partners management buyout intergenerational transfers in one way or another kind of have the same pros. Less disruptive, there's a legacy in place that you can continue, the costs are low, you have more control over the timing than just over the process in general. So you could almost look at those first three as quote unquote families of one sort or another. They kind of exhibit the same characteristics. They also exhibit some of the drama. Sale to employees is our fourth and last inside transfer. We're talking about ESOPs here, employee stock ownership plans, which of course, as you guys probably know, are part of the ERISA code. They fit in the same place as 401k, so they're heavily regulated. And these are going to fall, ESOP valuations are going to fall right in the middle because they have to. Department of Labor and IRS are going to come in and say it has to be valued at fair market. I get a lot of questions from business owners thinking about transition around employee ownership. It is of very high interest to them. Part of it is values driven. They want their employees to have a chance to own the company because they help build it in many cases. They also want to make sure that their employees are protected. It is a reasonable place to turn when you're thinking about transition in a lower middle market business. There are lots of pros to it, obviously. Again, extended family and continuity. For the owner, there is no better way tax-wise to exit a business. The tax benefits are just spectacular, quite frankly, and I think if Congress tried to create this plan today, it would be a dead end, but luckily it happened in the mid-1970s, and it's probably the most underutilized tool that we have for tax management and net proceeds, but just tremendous in the benefits that it conveys to the owner. A lot of employees like it, obviously, because they don't actually, in most cases at least, they don't actually pay anything for the shares, so ownership comes to them as an employee benefit. However, I would say on the other side of that, because it comes so easily and they don't take a whole lot of financial risk with it, it's often just not, if management doesn't communicate the power and the opportunity of employee ownership in a good way, consistently and relentlessly over time, the ESOP becomes fatigued. It's what we call it, is a fatigued ESOP. And if that happens in the first year or two, it's very hard to get back on track with the power of employee ownership, which is, quite frankly, proven. The National Center for Employee Ownership has studied this, and a lot of other people have too, and employee-owned companies outperform their peers in terms of value and revenue and competitive positioning and duration. So I think employee ownership is something that should always be on the table. I also acknowledge, at least in the case of the ESOPs, it is extremely complex and heavily regulated and fairly darn expensive to do, not only in the beginning, but as you know, the maintenance costs are pretty high year after year. I sit on the board of a 90% ESOP-owned company. I've been on the ESOP committee. I'm comfortable with it, but that's probably because I have to live it as a fiduciary. And there are a lot of boxes on the flow chart. Money moves around in very odd ways, and of course, in most cases, ESOPs are leveraged, so you're probably going to have a bank partner in the business that's going to restrict distributions and inject financial risk of the kind that owners and managers are often uncomfortable with. You can do it gradually. A lot of owners don't understand that you don't have to sell the whole thing at once to the ESOP. In fact, you can sell as little as 5% under some conditions, and then you can continue to transfer shares into the ESOP over time. I think that's a good way to do it, frankly, that staged transfer, because you can manage the debt on the balance sheet better. and also it helps you stay involved in the business to the extent that you can kind of encourage, train, nurture employees to think like owners. And you can also work with managers they're in an odd position in employee ownership where they have to actually manage people that own the company. And in many cases, they are co-owners. So wearing those two hats, knowing where ownership rights and obligations sit in the company and how to treat one another, and at the same time, being the managers of the company and directing the employee owners to do their jobs well, that can be a difficult balancing act. There are other forms of employee ownership. You guys are probably familiar with them, but employee stock purchase programs, grants, options, synthetic solutions like phantom stock and stock appreciation rights. So there are lots of different versions of this, some more complicated than others, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we should, in all cases, be talking to our owner clients about it because it gets better outcomes over time, and in many cases the tax advantages are just fantastic. Sell to a third party. This is where a lot of owners start the conversation. It is for most businesses not an option. Now there are a lot of smaller businesses that can transfer operator to operator, and we're seeing a definite uptick in those types of deals, and we have been over the last year, but mostly in smaller businesses with 5 million or less of enterprise value. Institutional money, private equity, strategic money from other corporations, family office money, obviously there's a lot of it. So the overhang in private equity is still very, very large. If you add family office money on top of it and corporate strategic capital on top of that, we're talking literally trillions of dollars available to invest in businesses, but not a whole lot of it moving right now, which is one of the reasons why multiples are up in these types of acquisitions. There are lots of pros, one of which is the higher price. If we're moving up that one company, many values chain, now we're beginning to see the top end of the value. And if it's a strategic buyer that can access synergies of various kinds, or take a piece of the market that they don't own, or create a bigger customer portfolio or a larger geographic footprint, then you'll see the value jump again. So that premium is very attractive to owners, and it can be a little bit of a shiny object, I think, because in this particular case, the disruption to the operations of the business is extreme. Most owners and their businesses are not in any way what I would call private equity ready. Private equity ready is our version of the highest standard of readiness for transition in the marketplace. If you can survive a private equity due diligence process and go smoothly through it, then you have really achieved a level that would open up all of the options to you and probably drive, because it's so disciplined, it would drive results that in terms of valuation or the smoothness of the transition that are going to go way beyond just deciding to do something at the intergenerational partner or management team level. So we like for our clients to be PE ready, but that standard is surprising to them. They don't understand in many cases when they put their business on the market, and if there is an institutional response, they are about to go through 3 to 6 months of some of the most difficult, distracting, disruptive, and in some cases, just for some owners, they report that it's just miserable, that they really hated it. Even if they got the deal done, and even if they got that, the value or more that they wanted. However, private equity groups and other strategic buyers can often refresh the business and bring additional expertise that just doesn't exist. And in the case of a recapitalization, which is the next slide, that may provide even more capital to achieve what the owner has had in their mind as a potential for the business or a future state, but hasn't had the capital or the expertise to actually access it. If you have a management deadlock or a family deadlock, bringing in institutional money and a refresh and a different kind of team can be a great way to move forward, to get out of that deadlock. Some of the cons, it's a long process. At least 9 months, I would say, in today's world, that's probably moving really fast. It is the highest absolute cost of any of the transitions, and it's going to cost a lot. There are a lot of lawyers, a lot of other advisors. There's going to be a big number on it at the end of the day. We usually tell our clients that if you are not willing to spend $250,000 or more on this type of transition, we would not recommend that you try to go down this road. On the advisory side, lots of professional advisor hours, and for us, if you're working on a success fee or some type of contingency, then you have to pick your ditches carefully here, because again, if the owner doesn't have that master plan in place, you do a lot of uncompensated work here and watch the thing fall apart at the last minute, and they are absolutely difficult to close. I would say that of all the options, this is the most emotional for the owner. It goes back to that life after business plan. If you're working with an owner, you can't get around this one. You have to understand that this is a highly emotional process, no matter the transition option. If you try to blunt that and kind of shove it to the side, then you're going to find that the owner will resist all of the way through. This is the most difficult for technical advisors like us to understand. We're not really trained psychologists. We shy away from entering into these uncomfortable soft issues, but in many cases they are the primary driver of whether this is going to get done or not. And then there are the privacy concerns, especially if there's a competitor at the table. How much information is going to get out into the community and potentially, possibly be damaging to the business if the deal doesn't go forward. Recaps or refinancing are really, just leaning on somebody else's balance sheet in a sense to drive the business success in the future. If it's a private equity group, it would be a stock sale. In many cases, if it's a third-party buyout, it's going to be an asset sale, and the old entity is going to stop functioning once the assets are transferred into a new entity. So it's really not a securities purchase. In this particular case with recapitalization, we're selling stock, I would say, the great majority of the time. And because of that, there might be some additional regulatory concerns, and in fact, it may fall under private securities offering. So a lot of people try to do these without the proper FINRA licenses. I would not recommend that if you're on the M&A side. But it can provide a really important second bite at the apple for the owner, where they might sell part of the company now, and with the additional capital and expertise and refresh of strategy and energy in the company, they can then benefit from that rise in value and then exit fully, probably to the same institution in many cases, at some point down the line. So that's a nice curve to think about for the owner. And this works really well with the other exit options. We talked about this just a little bit, but you could combine recapitalization, backing and management, team participation, employee participation. There's all sorts of ways to combine these things, mix and match them, that may in fact be the best way to go. Even though it adds complexity to the conversation, I actually think that it may de-risk the owner's position over time. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides at the end of this that just to illustrate that. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I started in one place and I've ended up in another, and I'll share that with you. A lot of owners don't like recapitalization because they want to just walk away. They want that clean break. And it's hard to have a partner to be accountable for if you've been your own boss for a long time, or even just a small partnership. So that loss of control, everybody's concerned about culture shift, but if there's a refresh to the business, maybe there ought to be a shift in culture. Maybe that's the direction that it ought to go. Like private equity buyout or any third-party deal, it can be slow. Orderly liquidation. Everybody doesn't. Nobody likes to liquidate their business, but in some cases, an orderly liquidation may be the best option, and that's typically businesses that are very asset-heavy. So the assets may be worth more in the marketplace than the going concern value of the business. And some examples of that might be a trucking company where the margins are very thin, but the assets themselves have value. Airlines, you can probably think of a lot of heavy asset companies that would have this. Unfortunately, going back to being the 12, quite frankly, about 88% of the market will end up in orderly liquidation. And that's why we as advisors need to start this process and get our clients transition ready so that that doesn't happen. We need to be able to move the needle on this, and we need to do it together. The readiness calculus is a concept that we use with our clients to demonstrate how understanding options and creating readiness leads eventually to wealth. So you start at the top. Readiness creates options. Having options and understanding them will create a higher probability of successful transition. Successful transition creates wealth. That is the harvesting equation. But you can also see that we don't skip steps here, right? We don't say, hey, you're ready, let's go to wealth. We actually have to create it within an ecosystem, and it is complex, and it does take time. Here's a poll question. May seem a little bit off topic, but Colin can explain. He's opened the poll up. We'll take a few seconds.
All right, we'll leave that open for about another 30 seconds here. So this is a question that we like to ask folks to get a better sense of what services they're providing, and we found that certain services, depending on how you're working today and what you're doing with clients, kind of helps us understand if we can be helpful to you as you're thinking about technology solutions out there, whether it's SageWorks products or somebody else's. It's kind of a sort of a strategy of what's the best fit and trying to figure out what your goals are and how those align with the different solutions available and what challenges you're seeing and how those align with the different solutions. So we like to ask this question to get a better sense. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And we only have a few minutes left, so let's go back to the presentation here, wrap up, and we should have some time for Q&A at the end.
Yeah, a little bit of a late start, so apologies for that. I hope you guys can hang on for a few minutes. I talked about this just a little earlier. The conversation in the advisory community has always been, we know the exit options, let's narrow it down because there are too many. Let's narrow it down as soon as we can, and let's move towards a point in the future where there is going to be 100% exit of some sort, or a what I would call a cliff exit. So let's assume that the owner has decided that they want to drive the value of the business over the next 3 to 5 years from 10 million to 40 million. That's a very aggressive curve. The conversation has been, yeah, we'll take that 3 to 5 years. We'll drive it linearly, right? That's false pretense number one. We'll get to 40 million, and then we'll all join hands and we'll jump and we'll hope that this happens. Of course, that is a very tall order. It's a big ask because we don't know what market conditions are going to be at the time. We don't really know if the business is going to be transition ready or what's going to be going on in the owner or his family's life. Hey, Colin, there's just a little bit of background noise there. So I want you to go back to that portfolio of investment assets. If we put the business on the wheel and we say the red dot over to the left, they've got 10 million in net worth, and let's just assume that 8 million of it is the business. Their liquidity in that particular case is going to be 2 million, and over time we might be able to grow it by 3, 4, 5% a year if it's well invested, but probably less than that because it's a conservative portfolio. So that dotted line represents the total progress of that liquid piece of the portfolio over a, let's say, 3-year period. We're growing the value of the business faster if we're doing a good job of value acceleration. Now, what have we done? We've made the Pac-Man bigger. We've actually increased the risk to the owner that if they don't, they're not able to exit their equity at the time that they've identified. They're actually going to be holding a lot more illiquid financial risk in their portfolio. We don't want that to happen. So how do we counter that? I think we take a hybrid or a full spectrum mix and match transition strategy. And that's because we created transition readiness, and in the readiness calculus, when we do that, when we have the options, we have a greater chance of success. So let's take the same 10 million portfolio, 8 million of it in the business. You can see it's not linear. This is an exponential curve. If you're doing value acceleration, you're going to start slower, and then you're going to begin to climb as you institute operational, strategic improvements to the business. However, the owner could exit the business slowly in smaller pieces using all of the options that are reasonably available to them. So for instance, they could sell a little piece of it in the beginning while the value is lower to the management team. Management team might be able to afford it at that point. Or maybe generations can be brought in earlier rather than at the point of, at a later point in the owner's life or when they're sick or after their death. They might sell the next piece to the employees, sell the next piece to a partner, whatever it might be. These first percentages on the curve at lower value are really what we would call alignment transfers. You need to get everybody on the same page about how to drive value of the business. And then as you go, you might do a recapitalization as the business needs capital and is growing faster. The owner may get to that point where the business or the portfolio is at 40 million, but now they only have 51% equity risk, and all along the way we've been able to take illiquidity and transfer it into liquidity. So their investment portfolio looks a lot different. We've actually, hopefully over time, decreased the size of the Pac-Man and also created more alignment within the business. They've actually gotten multiple bites at the apple over time here rather than just one at a very risky future point. So I would say we're going to manage the business as an investment asset. If we're actually going to put it on the graph, our job as advisors, if we're working with the business owner, is to take that black business value and make it more transparent. Turn it into potential. Turn it blue. Don't leave it black. When we talk to advisors and business owners about this, that pie chart is probably the most powerful way to not only demonstrate our role as advisors and the difference that we can make, but also demonstrate what's at stake for business owners. I think one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, what difference would it make if our clients were fully educated about all of their exit options? It would make our conversation easier. It would make their conversation and their comfort level much greater. And I think it would improve the outcomes. So ask yourself in your own client portfolio, what could you do, what can you do, and what will you do in the next 30 days? Make this a call to action and think about how you can put it to work in your own practice. Thanks so much. I think Colin's going to take the controls back.
All right, thank you, Sean. Really appreciate it. And we'll just go through a couple quick slides here and then wrap up. So one question for those of you who are interested in exit planning and learning a little bit more about the Exit Planning Institute, we're going to go launch a poll question briefly. And we'll leave that up for just another 10 seconds or so. Please take a moment to answer that, and we'll move on. All right, I'm going to close the poll question. So a couple of stats that I wanted to share briefly, and then we'll wrap this up. I wanted to mention a little bit about SageWorks and also share some information and some content we've put together. This is a slide that we update from time to time. You may have seen it before on one of our past webinars, but we like to look at how the trends in the industry are moving and really where advisors are seeing opportunity as they're working with businesses. So we've seen that, and this is interesting because I think for many years now, firms have talked about advisory services and the idea of being a trusted advisor and helping increase value for businesses. And today we're seeing 80% of the accounting market is looking at an immediate demand for advisory services. And of course, a lot of that business is coming from firms that are cross-selling to existing clients. They're figuring out how to better position their services for advisory work, and of course exit planning falls into that. So as you're thinking about your work and kind of where you could be taking advantage or staffing differently or changing the conversation that you're having with clients, that's certainly an area to consider. Now, on our side, on SageWorks, we have two products I'd mentioned earlier that relate to this type of work. There's the Business Valuation Solution, which follows the AICPA guidelines to perform evaluation, and then ProfitSense, which is an advisory tool built to analyze financial data, turn that data into easy-to-understand narrative reports that can look at that business and say, here's what's working, here's what's not, here's what you could do better, so that you have something to go with or take to the client meeting and share with them and talk about their business and figure out how to improve. So I'm gonna just give you a couple quick slides here, and then we'll get back to the Q&A and have one last poll question. So on the business valuation product, we basically designed this product to help people save time, and we were seeing that lots of valuations, no matter the size firm, had human error, frankly, and there have been studies that have shown that across different size firms they're running into issues, and we were seeing that people are spending 30 or 40 hours typically on evaluation. So we knew that we could design software that would help save time and improve the overall quality of the evaluation and help them write those reports, which can be very long, faster, and still maintain the same quality of work. So there's still customization involved, and it's still tailored to that specific client. So that led us to launch that valuation product about 3 years ago. And then long before that, about 16 years ago actually, and it's changed a lot over the years, but ProfitSense was launched as a way to help those business advisors and CPAs have those conversations with their clients and identify opportunities for improvement. So it's been a useful tool for many firms to differentiate their practice, but also to actually grow revenue, to improve retention rates, because they're offering those value-added services that are helping their clients succeed. At the end of the day, if you can help your client be more successful, they're going to want to come back to you. Just like at SageWorks, we want our customers to be successful and generate ROI from our products. So it should be a win-win for everybody when you're thinking about SageWorks technology and what you could be doing with it. I will offer this, and we'll send this around later. I know I don't have a lot of time here today, but we produce a lot of content. And this was an ebook that we published last year. It's a collection of interviews with thought leaders in the industry talking about how to take your firm to that next level, what that really looks like, and providing some practical strategies to do that. And we have other ebooks that you'll hear about from time to time, but this is a great one to take a look at. And finally, I'm going to have one poll question here for those of you who might be interested in learning more about us. And I'll launch this and leave it up for 30 seconds, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And in case you're wondering what answer you want to provide here, just a little bit about SageWorks. When we take calls with potential customers, we like to learn more about them, and of course you can ask questions, but it's really to try to figure out if it's a good fit. If SageWorks is really the solution that you need for what you're looking to accomplish. It varies from firm to firm, of course. Not everyone really wants to leverage our technology because maybe it's not really part of their strategy. But for those of you who are thinking about proactive advice and advising small to medium-sized businesses and helping them grow, generate more cash, improve their margins, and so on, SageWorks tools can be really useful to do that because we can provide that analysis. We also have the largest private company database in the country, so you can benchmark your clients against that data. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll question. Thank you to everyone who answered. And let's go ahead and get to the Q&A. So if you have questions, there's a questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. I'll take a look at that now. So here's one question, Sean, that came in, and it's asking about sole practitioners offering exit planning. Like, do you see sole practitioners typically offering exit planning? How frequent is that coming up?
So You know, the number of certified exit planning advisors continues to grow rapidly every year through the Exit Planning Institute. What we're finding is that it tends to divide into three groups. One are people who come for the credential to learn more. In other words, they probably will never actually put value acceleration methodology and exit planning into play as a practitioner, but they'll be smarter and can talk to their clients and do issue spotting with their clients as folks go through this. So they're getting questions from the clients that they don't know how to answer, and this provides a really good framework for them to provide. It adds value. Second group are people who have an existing practice, like an accounting practice, and they want to add exit planning services to the practice. And it's a way, I think, of smoothing revenue and also a way of adding value to clients and maybe even differentiating themselves in the marketplace. The third group are practitioners who plan to do it full time. And so in many cases, I would say the industry is, for the most part, very boutique. We see some larger accounting practices or consulting firms getting into this area, but those cultures don't always support what I would call advisory or consulting practices. It's not a great fit in many cases, and so we've seen a lot of starts and stops there. There are a lot of partnerships forming out there between the disciplines. So for instance, we've got my firm, SBA, works with wealth managers, some large institutions, community banks, accountants. We have relationships where we formed either joint ventures or strategic relationships, and I think that's an important piece of the model. This is a multidisciplinary process, so you need to put your team together, and if everyone is on the same page about this, you can't isolate. You have to learn how to work as a team in order to do this work. So I hope that answers your question. We do see sole practitioners going into it. Probably the most successful have been those that devote full time to this, but I've also seen some successful full-time practices.
Thank you, Sean. If you have any other questions here today, definitely put those in. We'll just stay live for another minute in case any questions are lingering. I know we've gone over a bit. Sorry again about the technical issues earlier on today. I did see one question about SageWorks. If you're looking to get a quote for your firm, we can provide that. Just reach out to us. My contact information is there at the bottom. I can help you out or pass you along to someone else here on our team to generate a quote for your firm. All right, looks like those are all the questions. So we can go ahead and wrap up. And Sean, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Again, you see some contact information here on the slide. If you're looking for more from the Exit Planning Institute or from SageWorks, certainly let us know, and I'm happy to redirect your inquiries to the appropriate person on either side. So thanks again for being here. Thank you, Sean. We really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.